With me in the studio is the leader of the City of York Council, James Alexander. James, good morning.
Good morning.
Why this increase in council tax?
Well, the first thing to say is the government gave a grant last year to councils to be able to freeze council tax. My party was the first in York to actually call for the acceptance of that. That money was given every year for 4 years. This is very different. What the government's offering this year is money for 1 year only. So next year, and we're doing a 2-year budget, you will be £1.8 million down to provide the same services before you've even started. So the consequence of that is either a 4.5% increase next year in council tax, which is very large, or you need an additional £2.2 million worth of cuts on top of the 20 we were already doing to be able to pay for that freeze.
But you're looking at increasing the council tax by 2.9%, aren't you? Right. Has your salary gone up by 2.9% over the last few years? Because mine hasn't.
No, mine's gone down.
So this is the problem, isn't it? You heard people there who Joe Nita was speaking to saying that people can't do anything, they're not going out, they can't afford to go out.
Yep.
So
but they also expect,
the
if you listen to those people, they also expect to have good quality services.
Yeah, but they're not getting them in some cases.
That are being given. When the government is cutting funding to local government by a third, we cannot provide everything that we've always done before.
What do you say to the lady then who says with Joe Nita that her dustbins are overflowing?
I would say to her, get in contact with us and we'll be able to try and sort that out. But what we have to look at here is we're taking a very tough decision of putting up council tax by 54 pence a week, roughly the same as a newspaper, to be able to put that money into elderly persons' care, which is desperately needed.
But people have to find the money, James, and that's the problem. There's no money around. People are already stretched. They can't afford to be paying anymore.
But they also don't want more cuts next year, and they also don't want to have huge council tax increases next year either. And that's why I think when you were interviewing Bob Neal earlier, he was very disingenuous about how he's trying to describe it.
Well, you mentioned Mr Neal. He's the local government minister, and you're right. We were speaking to him about half an hour ago on the programme. He had this to say.
The country as a whole is having to tighten its belt. There's no point getting away from that. But what I'm saying to you is that the vast majority of councils, 90% of councils, are being able to do that without putting their council tax up. Now, if 90% can do it, I'm not sure that York, if they really want to, can't. York ought to do the same rather than take the easy option of just putting up the tax.
He's not happy with you. He's got a point, hasn't he, James? 90%.
No, he hasn't.
He has. 90% of the councils across the country are managing to deal with it. You clearly aren't. So there's clearly budget mismanagement going on.
99% of all councils are doing a 1-year budget. They are not telling you what the consequences are next year.
Well, why can't you do a 1-year budget?
Because we're being open with the public to actually say what the consequences are of taking that freeze. Next year, you're going to have councils all around this country putting up huge council tax increases, or they're going to be doing further cuts.
But you're in a minority here, aren't you? You're in a minority here. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure,
Many
James,
councils are saying they are going to take the money out of their reserves to be able to pay for that increase in cost next year. York cannot do that. Our reserves are at absolute minimum. Our reserves were 11 million in 2008. They were reduced down to 6 million, which is our minimum, when we took control in May. And it's galling for Conservative ministers to come on your radio show and say that we should be having further cuts, or we should be taking out reserves, when it's their party that voted for those decreases over the last 4 years.
What are those reserves
puts us
for?
Not in a position. Those reserves are for if you ever have a difficult situation where a building had something wrong with it, or you had a service that completely collapsed, or you had an influx of people that needed care, then you have to dip into those reserves. But those reserves are at absolute minimum, and they cannot be used to be able to top this up. I mean, I've got right in front of me here the Conservative proposal, alternative to ours, for the budget which takes the freeze. The consequence of that is a 4.6% increase in council tax next year, or £1.8 million worth of cuts. Now, I'm sure if you ask those people you interviewed earlier again whether they would be happy with that, they would say no.
In the letter that came out from Bob Neal and his department, the Department for Communities and Local Government, he says in a couple of paragraphs, there's a strong moral case for the freeze, and he believes that freezing council tax is a public service. You're a public servant, so what you're doing is a disservice to the public.
No, and I believe that he's being very disingenuous because he's trying to hoodwink people. He's a hoodwink minister of a hoodwink government who's trying to be able to say that this is an inconsiderate decision being taken. And I would say it's far more inconsiderate to subject the people of York to an even higher council tax increase next year, or even more cuts. We are already seeing services being reduced and services we can no longer provide, and we're having to take tough decisions that some I disagree with, but there is no funding to be able to do it. And when he comes on here and saying saying we're pushing people to the edge by charging people an extra 54 pence a week, when it's his government that's forcing councils to put up rents to 80% market rent, that's really hurting people and forcing people to move away.
But you're
I think
hurting
that's galling.
people as well, James, aren't you, by putting up the council tax?
Not when we're putting that money into care services and looked after children. I completely disregard that. That 2.9% brings in £2 million, and that £2 million is going solely to elderly people's care and to looked after children, and that is the right thing to do.
So what help do you want then from the government? There are no guarantees out there.
To be honest, I want the government to be able to go on there. But we're not going to base budgets on a maybe or just in case. We're planning for the future. We're doing a 2-year budget to be able to actually show people exactly what is going to happen in our council services and exactly how they're going to be paid for. And to have Conservative proposals and Liberal Democrat proposals put in front of us saying, no, just do it 1 year and we'll worry about that next year, subjects people in York to higher cuts or higher council tax increases, and that is wrong. And that's why we've gone for 2.9 and not 3.5, which the government's capping at. We've gone for as a low amount of an increase as possible, and that's below Conservative councils such as Dover, Surrey and Peterborough, and that's why the government's annoyed. They're annoyed because they can't say we're a loony left council, and because we're also putting money into the local economy. We want people in jobs, and the government's not doing that.
Are there any chances at all, this meeting takes place tonight, where you decide the budget for the next 2 years, are there any chances at all that before that meeting you could change your mind?
And not the Labour group, no. We've set out our stall, we've said exactly why we're doing this, and we've explained the reasons for it. There are other proposals put forward by the other parties, and I just find it shocking that the Conservatives are saying we should cut our £30 million economic infrastructure fund, which Bob Neal has just said was a worthy proposition, to actually get people into work. And that has to also be paid for.
There's an interesting quote from one of the ladies that Joe Neaton spoke to her, and she said, it's one of those things, we've got no control over it, we can't do anything about it anyway, so in other words, we've just got to accept it and get on with it. They have got to pay because they can sort it out at the ballot box, which is what the vote's all about, and indeed protest. Now, there was a protest at last year's budget meeting. Are you listening to the people who put you in power?
No, we are indeed. People are saying they don't want these cuts coming from central government.
They don't want the council tax to go up.
But they will have more cuts or more council tax next year. If people are saying that they actually want to have huge rises next year, I don't believe that. That is not the case. They want councils to be efficient. They want us to be lean organisations. We're taking £10.5 million out this year in efficiency savings. We're reducing our management costs. We're looking at shared services. We're setting up traded services. We're changing our services into cooperatives and social enterprises to be able to reduce costs. But on top of that, the government is still cutting our funding. We cannot do everything we've done before. And to try and make sure that we can protect the most vulnerable, we're having to take tough decisions for the future to be able to increase council tax by 54 pence a week.
Thanks for that this morning. That's James Alexander, who's the Labour leader of the City of York Council.